Hi dear students, welcome back to my channel Nisha Verma's tutorial. I am Nisha Verma with my new video on the book Hornbill. I'll take the chapter The Portrait of a Lady. The Portrait of a Lady is a chapter written by Khushwant Singh. This is an autobiographical note, dear students. In this chapter, Khushwant Singh has described about his own grandmother. His grandmother was like anybody else's grandmother. She was an old lady. She was as old as she could not grow more older than that. She was very religious kind of lady. She was kind-hearted lady. She always kept on reciting her prayers. Let's read about this chapter. Let's read about this story, The Portrait of a Lady. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of a person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Author's grandmother, Khushwant Singh's grandmother, was an old woman. Her face was full of wrinkles. She was very old as she could not grow more older than that. Khushwant Singh had known her grandmother from 20 years, and she looked the same. Whenever the people used to tell him about his grandmother, that once she was young, once she was pretty, and she had a husband, this thing was very, very unbelievable for Khushwant Singh. The thought of being her young was revolting. He could not believe that once she must be young and beautiful girl. He just thought she was old grandmother always, because the portrait of grandfather also hung in his drawing room. And in that portrait, he also looked a very, very old person, as if he must be 100 years old. A person who must be having lots and lots of grandchildren. But he didn't look the sort of person who must be having wife or children. Same was the case with grandmother. Grandmother looked very, very old, and author just thought that perhaps she was the same from the very beginning. She couldn't be young and pretty. She couldn't be a sort of person who must be having husband. She just thought her that she was a grandmother from the very beginning and who had lots and lots of grandchildren. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older, and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untightly over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountain, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and content. Author's grandmother was short and fat. She was slightly bent. To balance her stoop, she used to keep one hand on her waist, and in other hand she always used to carry the rosary, the beads of rosary, and her lips always moved in inaudible prayer. She was beautiful. She always used to wear spotless white clothes. Her hair were silver, they were scattered, and her face was pale, puckered. But she was beautiful. She was as beautiful as the mountains, the landscapes, or in the winter season. Peace could be seen every time on her face. Author and grandmother were good friends when they were in the village. When author's parents went to city for their business, when author's parents went to city, then author and grandmother was left all alone in the village. Grandmother used to wake him up early in the morning, bathe him, and while bathing she used to sing the songs, the bhajans, in the hope that her grandson may learn it. Grandson author, he loved the voice of his grandmother. He listened to those bhajans, those songs, but he hardly tried to learn those bhajans. Then she used to get him ready for the school and make the bundle of his things to the school: wooden slate, earthen ink pot, red pen, and she used to tie them all in bundle. And then they used to go to school after taking the breakfast of stale chapatis with butter and sugar spread on it. Grandmother used to carry chapatis, the leftover chapatis, the stale chapatis with her whenever they used to go to school, and after returning back from the school, she used to throw these chapatis to the village dogs. The village dogs used to follow them growling and fighting.